Welcome in along with Eric Eager. I'm Steve Palazzolo. Today discussing the franchise tag, what it means, and who's going to use it as we head into free agency. So let's start, Eric, with the franchise tag as a whole. Let's explain it for the fans. What are its intentions? How does it work essentially for the team and the player from a broad view?
Yeah, it gives the team an opportunity to keep one of its core players at a steep price. However, the benefit for the team is that you don't have that long-term commitment. So when you have a player, for example, like D Ford, who plays extremely well in the final season of his contract, they'd like to have him around because he's very valuable to their defense, but they don't necessarily want to buy in to him for the next 4 or 5 years. It normally gets applied to premium positions like edge or quarterback because, again, those contracts are the longest, the lengthiest, the most guaranteed money. The teams will often absorb a big hit in 1 year as opposed to a long-term commitment.
Yeah, and when you talk about a guy like D Ford, I think we'll talk about him more in a second, but the example of DeMarcus Lawrence being kind of a one-year wonder for the Dallas Cowboys, Ford is similar. So it kind of buys the team the extra year for this player to prove it, gives him another contract year. But the players don't love this, right? I mean, they're hitting free agency. There's really not much like this in other sports. Usually when you hit free agency, you're out there, you're on the open market. So players, even though they get paid handsomely, if they get franchise tagged for that 1 year, they don't love it because of that long-term security that is left on the table.
Yeah, I think choice is a big deal for a lot of these guys. You know, you have your 4 years, 5 years. If you're a first-round pick, you could see the finish line to where even if you want to stay with your existing team, you have the choice. And delaying that another year, I think, is a little bit demoralizing. And then on the other side, what you risk here, so it's not a riskless thing for a team, right? Because you can make a player disgruntled by applying the tag to them and ruin that relationship for the future. Or in the case of Kansas City, for example, with Eric Berry, you could have a guy play his best season on the tag and then it costs more in a subsequent year. So ultimately, it's a risk-reward thing that both the team and the player have to resolve.
All right, let's get into some of the specifics. We talked about D Ford of the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's follow up on that. I do think this is very similar to DeMarcus Lawrence, who again in 2017 had a breakout season. He gets franchise tagged, and then in 2018 has another great season. It ends up working out pretty well for the Cowboys. They didn't have to make the long-term investment. They get another excellent season out of Lawrence. Now he becomes a free agent, and they have a chance to use it again and see what that happens with that relationship. But Ford was even worse than Lawrence in his first 3 years in the league. Last year, breakout season, leading all edge defenders in pressures. He seems like a classic franchise candidate for another prove-it year for D Ford.
Yeah, especially considering Justin Houston's an issue for them cap-wise. The rest of their defense is a huge question mark. If you let Ford go altogether, you almost have no talent aside from Chris Jones on your defense. But if you sign him to a big deal, you could be in the situation that they're currently in with Eric Berry, where they have a guy with big money and you have almost no production from that contract so far. So it really is this quintessential perfect position to apply the tag. It'll be about $17 million or so a little bit under what his per year rate would be if they were to assign him to a big extension at the top of the market. But ultimately here, this is the classic, the quintessential case. And because of how statistics, general statistics, not PFF statistics, are for edge guys, it's like 4 or 5 plays out of 1,000 you get judged by in terms of sacks. If he regresses a little bit, maybe they'll get lucky, even if he's the same person from a pressures perspective.
Yeah, from a PFF perspective, 6 sacks versus 10 sacks isn't a big deal, but to the public perception or to the NFL, a massive difference in player. Another edge defender who is right behind D Ford when you include the postseason as far as most pressures go, 78 of them, Trey Flowers of the New England Patriots. The case here where they drafted him in the 4th round in 2015, they get incredible value out of him over the last 3 years, including top-notch play in 2 Super Bowl runs. And now, where do the Patriots stand? You've got this steal of a player who has been the one guy that could get after the quarterback, but now he's about to break the bank, potentially in free agency.
Yeah, and I mean, after a postseason in which they scheme pressure extremely well, it's probably not going to be in their best interest to overpay for a player, with a particular skill set. They think probably that they can scheme pressure with also ran players because aside from Flowers, they were able to do that. Patriots have a lot in terms of free agency coming up in 2020. It'd be interesting to see if they're willing to commit there to, absorb some of that cap space into the future.
And currently really tight on cap space, and it would be difficult right now mathematically to fit Trey Flowers under the cap. You like to talk about how important coverage is versus pass rush. The Patriots, I think, generally follow that philosophy where they'd rather cover first, like you said, manufacture pressure second. You mentioned the disgruntled franchise tag. Seattle Seahawks have two potential options in Earl Thomas or Frank Clark. Do we see either one of these guys being a good franchise tag option? Our guy Mike Renner on the website said franchise Earl Thomas. I don't know if you actually want to do that to him.
Well, unless you're going to trade him, and there were rumors that he was on the trade block before he broke his leg in Arizona last year. I do think that that's a possibility. The issue, of course, is that if you can't find a suitor or if your price is too high, you're going to be stuck with this player who may or may not show up, or if he does, he could be a lot like last year where even though he did play extremely well in the games he played for Seattle, he wasn't necessarily in the best shape, and you ended up with an injury with him. You could always have that risk again, and eventually he leaves and you get nothing for him.
The Frank Clark situation is an interesting one because a couple years ago, Seattle had one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. Michael Bennett was there, Cliff Averill. Frank Clark was the number 3 guy. Now he's the number 1 guy. If he's gone, Seattle has to replace him. Now, it is a deep edge defender market if a lot of these guys hit free agency, and it's also deep in the NFL draft, but this is risky for the Seahawks, whose pass rush continues to get worse and worse year over year. Is Frank Clark a guy that they should just tag and figure out the long-term deal with him?
Well, yeah, this is the tough part about evaluating the NFL, in that the Seattle Seahawks, on a process standpoint, were not a good defense a season ago. They struggled in many areas, including the secondary. They really only had 2 players that played terrifically well for them defensively, and that was Clark and Bobby Wagner. If you view them as an average defense that could fall to a poor defense without Frank Clark, then you probably want a franchise tag. If you view them as a poor defense, as I think we would, Clark may be less of an issue there. They might just want to rebuild altogether. So there really has to be part of where you view their defense in terms of your calculus.
Another edge defender potentially on the market, JADEVEON CLOWNEY from the Houston Texans. Mike Renner on ProFootballFocus.com says, give him the franchise tag. The Texans have the money. I don't hate it because he continues to improve. He's excellent against the run. Where does his value stack up when you talk about his ability as the number 2 edge defender against the run, but he's not an elite pass rusher? Good, not great from that standpoint. How does that all stack up?
Yeah, it's really interesting. If they want to take a traditional defensive approach, I think he's less valuable just because, as you said, his pass rushing skills are not up to par. But if you look at, in terms of the Patriots, where they take their guys and they rotate their linebackers among edge, off the ball, Clowney's a pretty good off the ball player, both against the run, but also as a coverage player. So he offers a lot of versatility, and I think if you properly use him, he can be really valuable. But his lack of elite pass rushing ability is probably going to lower a lot of people's opinions of him.
Still a good compliment with J.J. Watt on the other side. Another similar situation now, the Atlanta Falcons with Grady Jarrett. It's similar to the Trey Flowers thing. You get this steal in the 5th round in Grady Jarrett. You get incredible value out of him for 4 years. You've got to be crying if you have to let him walk, so the Falcons have to do everything they can to bring him in. What happens value-wise here? You've got 4 years of a bargain, and then you probably have to overpay him just to keep him. How do you balance that if you're the Falcons?
Well, and not only that, but you have Jarrett, who's been really healthy and good the last 2 years, but he's had issues with injuries previously. 2016, I believe, 2017, he had some issues there. So the question then becomes, you don't want, with these contracts, to be paying people for what they did. You want to be paying them for what you project them to be, and we know that interior pressure is ever so slightly less valuable than edge pressure. So in this rebuilding Falcons defense, we've already seen them like Robert Alford go, Brian Poole go. Do they want to, go all in on a position like interior when their secondary is probably the place that they should look?
And defensive line, though, has been an issue over the last few years. They've continued to need to add to it. In his 53 pressures, Grady Jarrett, 53 pressures, those 21 more than any other interior player in Atlanta. That's a tough decision for Atlanta. I think I'd lean toward giving him the tag and continue
Hopefully
to develop
you can figure
them.
out a contract extension.
Right. Hopefully you can figure out the long-term deal. One more player to highlight, though, Landon Collins of the New York Giants. A fascinating career, struggles as a rookie. He's in a perfect role his 2nd and 3rd year playing this. Not so much a box safety, but this quarter safety that could play against the run, cover in short area spaces. Took a bit of a step back, though, in 2018. I think he's a very good safety for the right scheme, but I think we're also a couple years removed from seeing him in that perfect role for the Giants. Do they go franchise tag with a guy like Landon Collins, who's still only 25?
Yeah, I mean, the age is a huge thing. The fascinating part about Landon Collins is that he's a classic example of somebody whose scheme is going to depend upon how valuable he is, right? So if he's playing a completely deep safety, he's probably not as valuable, but he's also, if he's playing more of a linebacker, similarly, if they're going to utilize him as they did, in those Spagnuolo years, they're probably going to get their bang for their buck, but there's no guarantee that they'll do so. So I think, you really have to resolve how they're going to use him in that defense before you decide how much to pay him, because we know safety is this weird thing where Tyrann Mathieu gets paid a certain amount, Eric Berry gets paid a certain amount. They don't even play the same position. So it's really hard to find comps here.
Yeah, when you see Landon Collins, if he's in the right situation, he's one of the best in a too-high safety type of role. So there you have it. It is the franchise tag, everything you need to know about it and what NFL teams are going to do. We'll see where they spend their money here in the coming weeks.